Since I published my videos on Rainbow Six Siege and Warzone's audio settings, I've gotten a ton of comments asking what settings to use with gaming headsets. It's probably the most frequent question I get, so I've decided to make one video to answer the question for everyone. So the short answer is, I don't know. I don't own any of the specific gaming headsets people have asked about, and in fact, I don't own a gaming headset at all. The slightly longer answer is, whatever settings you use don't really matter, it's just personal preference. Let me explain. Equalizers, or EQs for short, are a type of processor that changes the tonal content of an audio signal. It's like a volume control that lets you turn the signal up and down, but you can turn particular frequencies up and down rather than the entire signal. Lots of sound systems have at least a basic EQ in the form of bass and treble controls, or sometimes low, mid, and high controls. Many headset manufacturers have added even more complex EQ controls to their headset software in order to give the user more control in customizing their experience. Many users, not entirely unfairly, have assumed the EQ controls are something they can use to gain a competitive advantage in order to hear certain sounds better. The common thought is that an EQ lets you control the level of different sounds, so you can use it to bring up sounds you want to hear, like footsteps, and bring down less important sounds like gunfire. To show you why that doesn't work, I have a quick demonstration. What you see right now is a frequency analyzer. It's a tool that shows us how much frequency information is present in an audio signal, with the lower frequencies on the left and the higher ones on the right. Right now, it's showing us the frequency content in my voice, but let's switch it over to some sound effects. First is a hard-soled shoe on concrete. As you can see, the fundamental frequency of the shoe is centered right on 400 Hz, while the high frequency information mainly sits around 2 to 6K. Perfect then, all you need to do is boost those two frequencies, right? Sadly, it doesn't work that way. If we switch to that same shoe walking on gravel, you can see the lowest frequency is around 800 Hz, and we have an equal distribution of sound above that. Our boosts for concrete won't work for these gravel footsteps. If we switch to walking on grass and leaves, the footsteps are even more high-frequency focused without a strong fundamental. To be fair, some sound designers and developers counteract that by artificially adding a strong fundamental sound at a set frequency, which you hear for all footstep sounds regardless of surface. But that isn't always true, and what frequency that sound is at will depend on the designer's choice. Still, that doesn't mean we can use an EQ to adjust the sound, because if we look at sounds we don't want to boost, for example gunfire, you can see that gunshots exist at all sorts of frequencies as well, and any changes we try to make to footsteps to make them more audible will inevitably make gunfire louder as well. So if you can't use an EQ to gain an advantage, what's the point? Well, it exists for the same reason as bass and treble controls on a stereo system, to adjust the sound to suit your personal tastes. Some people prefer to hear slightly more bass, others more high-end, some prefer a variation of both. The complex controls you get with your headset are just a slightly more precise variation of that. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the trend among manufacturers to add more EQ controls. Having an EQ with half a dozen bands of control is useless if you don't understand what each of those bands is doing. It's cool to advertise that your headset can do that, but most of the time it just leads to paralysis of choice where there's so many options that users don't know what to do and the controls are too precise to experiment and hear the differences for yourself. It's easy to tweak a bass and treble control to get it where you like it, but not so for complex EQs. I say that just to point out that if you're watching this video because you have no idea how to use or set the EQ settings on your headset, it's not your fault. It's the fault of the manufacturer. I'd recommend experimenting with presets if your software offers them, and seeing what sounds best to you. Make sure any setting doesn't become obnoxious after longer periods of listening. Also, it's not the worst thing in the world to just leave the EQ settings alone. Sound designers and the audio engineers who designed your headset worked really hard to make the sound a certain way, and they all have ears that are trained way better than yours or mine. If you don't feel confident in adjusting any of the settings, it's okay to just not change them at all. Just don't feel like you have to change them in order to gain some kind of advantage, because that won't work. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked this video, if you found it useful, hit that like button. If not, feel free to hit the dislike button. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those down in the comment section down below. And as always, if you want to see more videos like this one, definitely hit that subscribe button.